Joining me on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, Geoff Mosher, Eagles Insider. He joins Mike Gill during the week on the Sports Bash Show on 97.3 ESPN. And Geoff, I'm glad you're here today because I think a lot of people out there don't fully understand this Eagles front office situation with Joe Douglas leaving. Andy Weidel basically takes his job. Howie Roseman has a new job title. So just starting at a fundamental level, explain to the audience, how exactly does a front office even work?
Oh, that's a great question. And for a lot of teams, it works differently, Josh. And that's why you'll see a lot of teams that have instability in their front office. And, that's the kind of team that you see that with. They're constantly hiring and firing general managers and have a kind of a backbone. You don't have a identity of a franchise because it's constantly changing because the people who are brought in to bring in the players through free agency, through the draft, are different. And so they may have different ways and different things that they look for, and they may have different egos. And the most important thing in any NFL front office for me, to have sustained success. Anybody can win a Super Bowl because they have a great coach or a great player, a great quarterback. But for have long-term success, say like the Steelers do, like the Ravens do, like the Packers do, it's important to have the same people in place at the higher up positions, and those people then have their grading system, their philosophy, and then that trickles on down to all the lower level scouts who are out across the country looking at players. And then by the same token, that those people in the front office, they work with the coaches to make sure that they're delivering to the coaches the type of players the coaches need. Everybody knows that, Doug Peterson is an offensive-minded coach. He's a lot different than Mike Zimmer from the Vikings, who's a defensive-minded coach. And Wade Phillips plays a different style of defense than Jim Schwartz. So some players are going to excel in one team and not be so good for another, and vice versa. So that's why front office continuity is important, because usually if you have good front office, stable front offices, you're getting good players, and you're delivering the right players to the coaches who are then maximizing those players' success, and you have success on the field. And that's why you'll have success on all three levels, front office, coaching staff, and players. And that's why teams are able to have long-term success. Steelers, Packers, Patriots, Ravens. The common bond is these guys aren't changing coaches and quarterbacks every 2 or 3 years the way, say, the Jets are, the Browns are, and things like that. So that's a roundabout way of me of saying, with Joe Douglas leaving the Eagles, Josh, it was important that Howie took the people who Joe Douglas brought into the front office and kept them and rewarded them. That quote-unquote Baltimore Ravens style of scouting that Joe Douglas brought here from his time there is now preserved because the people that Joe brought in, many of them from the Ravens chain, are still here. And now they have higher titles. And now the people and the players that these guys are looking for are the same. And the coaching staff we know is generally the same. And so that continuity gets to go, it gets to carry on even in Joe's absence. And that's really important.
And I also know that you explained this on your Inside the Birds podcast. You and Adam Kaplan do that podcast together, that the importance that when you're giving people these titles, it's also a way of taking care of them financially, right?
Yeah. So take Andy Weidel. He was Joe's right-hand man, if you want to call it. Joe was the vice president of player personnel, and Andy Weidel was the assistant director of player personnel. So now most contracts for scouts and front office people are 2 years. Andy Weidel had a year left. So it was important for Howie now to make sure that not only did he promote him with a good title, the same title Joe Douglas had, but he signed an extension. So it's probably what I'm going to guess is a year extension on top of the year that he already had. So Andy Weidel will be here through this year and then likely through the next year again before they have any other, decisions on his future. And same thing with the scouts underneath Andy Weidel, like Ian Cunningham and some of the guys that you saw in the press release. And so what that means is a year from now, when their contracts would have been up, they're not running to go to Florham Park, New Jersey with Joe Douglas and getting out of their contract. They feel rewarded. They feel like their voice has meaning because Howie gave them not only the contract extension, but a better title to want to stay and grow here in Philadelphia.
Follow Geoff on Twitter at Geoff Mosher NFL on Twitter. Joining me here on a Boardwalk kind of hotline. So couldn't I argue that Andy Weidel ascending to what used to be Joe Douglas' position and then mostly just keeping the structure of the organization, it basically then is business as usual. It's almost as if people wouldn't really notice that Joe Douglas is gone then, right?
Well, I mean, that's the idea, right? I mean, there are teams, I bring up the Ravens. That's where Joe Douglas is from. That's an organization known for excellence in scouting. Same thing with the Steelers. Those teams have lost some personnel in the front office to other jobs. The Ravens just had Ozzie Newsome retire, but Ozzie Newsome always had a right-hand man named Eric DeCosta. And Eric DeCosta was a very well-respected front office guy and talent evaluator. And he turned down job offer after job offer after job offer to make sure that, knowing when Ozzie Newsome would retire, he was going to be the one to take over. And so you would assume now with the Ravens that even though Ozzie Newsome is gone, that everything that Ozzie brought to that franchise is going to be carried on under Eric DeCosta. And so to your point, even though Joe Douglas is gone, it should be business as usual with Andy Weidel now in charge, and then many of the guys that Andy and Joe brought in together for the last 2 years still in the building and still doing the scouting. Now, everybody is different. I can't say that Andy Weidel is Joe Douglas. Hey, he may be better. We have no idea. But the point is the philosophy remains the same. As you said, business as usual. When the scouts go out looking at college prospects and when the pro scouts start evaluating potential free agents, they're all doing it with the same blueprint in mind now that they've done the last 2 to 3 years, which has been a successful blueprint because not only has the team won the Super Bowl, they've had winning records, they've withstood injuries, they've had minor role players brought in to play one role, but then all of a sudden playing bigger roles, whether it's a Patrick Robinson or a Chris Long or Garrett Blunt. Not everything, but almost everything the Eagles have done from a talent acquisition standpoint the last few years has really worked out for them. And so that should continue. We can't predict the future, but the ideas, the principles, what has made the Eagles good from a philosophical standpoint for the last 2 or 3 years should not change.
And Jeff, one more before I let you go, and I appreciate your time here on a Saturday. I know you're a busy dad doing what dads do out there. Who is Andrew Berry, and why should Eagle fans care?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question because there's 2 layers to that. First of all, what I'll tell you is in talking with other people around the NFL in front office positions, some of them who have worked here in the Eagles and have just moved on, they were all looking at the Eagles in the last week and a half to see what Howie Roseman was going to do after Joe left. They knew Howie brought in Andrew Berry from the Browns, and that Andrew Berry, although he does have a good scouting background, mainly got his job in Cleveland to lead that analytics movement that they were doing. When Howie hired him here, he hired him. That's tough. Howie hired him to preside over the football analytics staff. And then when Joe Douglas left, a lot of these people who know the Eagles well were wondering if Howie was going to use that as an opportunity to, he's now a Super Bowl GM. He's one of the most respected GMs in the sport. People were wondering if he was going to use that opportunity to put Andrew Berry, his hire, in that place for Joe Douglas. And then would that shift, or would that signal a shift from the traditional field scouting to the more analytics-based approach? And so a couple of people reached out to me and said, I'm really wondering what's going to happen here. And they even wondered if the emphasis on analytics drove Joe Douglas away from the job. So with Andrew Berry now still having a prominent voice, still presiding over the football operations, which is, analytics, but with Andy Weidel, the traditional field scout who Joe Douglas brought in, promoted to Joe's spot, what I think it signals to, what I think fans should understand is that although the Eagles really do tout analytics and they believe that they are, first rate on the cutting edge of the analytics movement in football, they are not going full court press to analytics, and Howie is not taking back control and making this his entire staff. I think this is a move that shows maturity with Howie Roseman, lack of ego, to say, hey, what we had here, a nice marriage between traditional field scouting and analytics, has worked really well for us. So let's just continue, like you said, Josh, business as usual. Let's make sure Joe Douglas's voice is now not completely lost, but let's also make sure that Andrew Berry's voice in analytics is important too, and that's what you have now.
Follow him on Twitter at Geoff Mosher NFL. You can catch him on the Sports Bash during the week here on 97.3 ESPN. And also check out his podcast, Inside the Birds with Adam Kaplan. A lot of great information on the Eagles all year long. Geoff, appreciate your time today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Josh. See you soon.